He thought I was just the wife, the beautiful, supportive accessory he paraded through events. He forgot one crucial detail: that accessory signs all the checks. By the time the auctioneer announces the grand prize, my husband is about to discover the true cost of his betrayal, and it will not be charged to my card. My name is Alara Vance, and I am 38 years old. Tonight is the Aegis Fund annual gala, and my reflection in the floor-to-ceiling glass of our Lincoln Park penthouse confirms I am, as always, perfect. The gown is a deep sapphire silk, clinging just enough to be admired, tailored enough to be respected. Every strand of my hair is lacquered into a severe, elegant chignon. My makeup is a mask of serene neutrality, but beneath the diamonds at my throat, my pulse is a frozen, steady rhythm. I am hollowed out, meticulously cold. This is the performance of my life. I am the chief operating officer of the Vance household. It is a role I stepped into when I paused my own career. I do not merely manage the caterers and the cleaning staff. I manage the Vance portfolio, the offshore accounts, the real estate holdings, and the complex trust that funds our entire existence. My most significant project, however, has been the careful construction of my husband, Julian Vance. Julian entered the living room, a whirlwind of charisma and expensive cologne. He is the golden boy of Aegis Strategy Group, the ambitious executive climbing the ladder so fast he leaves scorch marks. Tonight is his coronation, the night he solidifies his position as the firm's next potential partner. He smiled at me, that blindingly white, practiced smile he uses for shareholders and cameras. "You look stunning, Ilara," he said, adjusting his bespoke tuxedo cuffs. I inclined my head. "You look perfect." Julian. He came home late again last night, well past 2 in the morning. He smelled of something foreign, a niche perfume heavy on sandalwood and tuberose, a scent too complex and cloying to be accidental. It was not my scent. For weeks, there has been an emotional detachment, a polite distance that felt more like a boardroom negotiation than a marriage. He was here, but he was vacant. I remember the man I met, the eager junior analyst brimming with ideas but lacking polish. I was the one with the finance degree, the one who saw the strategic mind beneath the ill-fitting suits. I was the one who taught him which fork to use, how to charm the old money, and which stocks to leverage. I built him from the ground up. I was his foundation, his strategist, and his bank. I ran my hand over the silk of my gown. He had presented it to me 2 days ago, claiming he saw it and thought of me. I knew his executive assistant, a mousy woman named Clara, had picked it out and paid for it with the corporate card I monitor. The gesture was as empty as his eyes. We stood before the elevator, ready to descend. He offered his arm. I placed my hand upon his forearm. The touchlight. Professional. We caught our reflection in the mirrored doors, the perfect couple. The image of Chicago power and success. We exchanged the look, the one we had perfected over a decade of these events. It was professional. It was rehearsed. It was completely, terrifyingly empty. He thought this was just another night of polite smiles and silent support. He believed I was the dutiful wife, worried about canapes and seating charts. He had no idea. He had no idea that I was not just suspicious. I knew. I had known everything for exactly 72 hours. I had spent those hours not crying, but calculating. While he was charming clients, I was liquidating assets. While he was sleeping, I was restructuring our financial world. I opened my small, glittering clutch, ostensibly to check my lipstick. I did not care about the lipstick. My fingers brushed against the cool metal casing of my phone. It was charged, connected, and logged into every portal that mattered. Tonight was not about enduring his betrayal. It was about executing the consequences. It began 3 days ago. It was not a tearful confrontation or a private investigator's grainy photograph. It was a lapse in his security. Julian had left the shared breakfast tablet, the one we used for reading the Wall Street Journal and checking the markets, on the kitchen island. He had forgotten to lock it. I picked it up to clear the notifications, and one remained. A simple, sterile email confirmation from Cartier. Your custom order is ready for pickup. A cold stillness settled over me. I had not ordered any custom jewelry. I had not ordered anything. My birthday was months away. Our anniversary had passed. This was not for me. My first instinct was not to scream or cry or throw the tablet against our imported marble backsplash. My financial training kicked in, that cold, analytical part of my brain that sees patterns in liabilities. This was not a moment of betrayal. It was a data point requiring investigation. I did not confront. I audited. I went to my home office, the true nerve center of our lives, and sat at the custom desk from which I managed everything. I logged into the master financial portal, a bespoke system I designed myself. It links every account, every investment, every line of credit. Julian had access, but he never used it. He found it too complicated. He preferred the simple, curated summaries I prepared for him. I bypassed the summaries. I went straight to the raw data of the credit card statements. Our joint accounts. The charges were there, hidden in plain sight among the legitimate household expenses. Dinners for two at Alinea and Smith. On nights I had been at a charity board meeting. Room service charges from the Langham, where we did not have a reservation. Multiple purchases from La Perla and Agent Provocateur, and there it was. The charge from Cartier, posted 5 days prior, a $25,000 diamond tennis bracelet. It was a significant, foolish expense, but it was not the only one. I dug deeper. Julian, in his arrogance, believed me to be technologically ignorant, a holdover from his assumption that my pause in career meant a pause in intellect. He had opened a separate credit card, an American Express Plum card, tied to his business account but used for personal expenses he clearly thought were hidden from me. He did not realize that as the primary guarantor on his business credit, I had administrative oversight. I opened the statement, the Langham, the lingerie, the dinners. They all lined up, and the hotel bookings, unlike the credit card charges, had a name attached for the reservation, a name that was not mine. Serafina Hayes. The name was vaguely familiar. I accessed the Aegis Strategy Group's internal directory, a privilege I retained as the spouse of a senior executive. Serafina Hayes, a new associate, hired 6 months ago, 26 years old, bright, ambitious, and, according to her staff photo, stunning. I felt no rage. I felt no heartbreak. The emotion that washed over me was a dreadful, icy calm. It was the feeling I used to get when I found a critical error in a quarterly report. It was the feeling of a balance sheet that was suddenly, painfully clear. The numbers did not lie. I did not sleep for the next 48 hours. I sat at that desk, fueled by black coffee and a cold, clarifying fury. I mapped every single financial artery connecting us, every joint account, every shared asset, every line of credit where I was the primary holder and he was just an authorized user. I traced the flow of our capital, the money I had invested and tripled over the last decade. I built this financial empire. I designed its architecture. I knew where every support beam was placed, and I knew exactly which ones to remove to make the entire structure collapse. And Julian, in his supreme arrogance, was living on the top floor, admiring the view, completely unaware that I was standing in the basement with the blueprints, about to pull the foundation out from under him. A hostile takeover requires a strategy. My emotions were irrelevant. My methodology was everything. The 48-hour audit was complete. The next 24 hours were for execution. My first call was not to our family advisor at J.P. Morgan Private Bank, a man Julian charmed on the golf course. It was to my personal contact at a rival firm, a woman I had known since my own days on the trading floor. I spoke in clean, concise code. I'm restructuring my personal portfolio, effective immediately. I need 3 new accounts, sole signatory, maximum discretion. I am anticipating a significant liquidity event. Within an hour, the accounts existed, invisible to anyone but me. Then, the delicate work began. I sat at my terminal and initiated the transfers. One cannot simply move millions without tripping automated fraud alerts. I started with the joint savings. I moved $9,500, then another $9,000. I repeated this process across 3 different accounts. Small, seemingly random transactions, bleeding the joint holdings dry, siphoning the liquid assets into my new, firewalled accounts. It was tedious work, like picking a lock 1 pin at a time. Next, I opened the credit card portals, the American Express Centurion, the Chase Sapphire Reserve. Julian loved these cards. He loved the weight of the metal, the way a concierge would gasp when he produced the black card. He failed to remember that when I added him to my accounts, I had remained the primary cardholder. He was, in the cold language of the bank, merely an authorized user. I read the terms of service, though I already knew them by heart. The primary card member has sole authority to manage the account, including closing the account, setting and changing spending limits, and removing authorized users at any time. Absolute control. I did not want to just remove him. That was too simple, too clean. He would know immediately. The true devastation would be public. So I prepared the trap. I opened his spending limits. For the Sapphire Reserve, I lowered his total credit line to $100. For the Centurion, the black card, his pride, I did something more precise. I kept the limit high, but I activated a suspicious activity flag. I set the notification parameters any single transaction over $500 would require immediate verbal authorization from the primary cardholder. From me, the final pieces needed to be set. I drafted 2 emails. The first was to my lawyer, the sharpest divorce attorney in Chicago, a woman who answered only to me. The subject line was Vance v. Vance Execute. The body contained a single file, the complete audit of his infidelity and his hidden assets. The second email was to my accountant, another loyalist. Execute transition to sole proprietorship. Both emails sat in my drafts folder, scheduled to send at 10 p.m. tonight. My phone felt cool in my hand. I called the building management for our penthouse. This is Alara Vance in 4801, for security reasons. I need to reset all entry codes to our residence, effective at midnight tonight. Please also remove Julian Vance from the authorized resident list. There was a pause. Is he still an authorized guest, Mrs. Vance? No, I replied. He is not. I confirmed my reservation at the Peninsula, a grand suite under my maiden name. My bags were already there, delivered by a service that afternoon. With the digital architecture of my new life in place, I turned my attention to the physical. I stood before my closet. I selected the sapphire gown. I began the long, meticulous process of painting on the mask. I applied my makeup with a surgeon's steady hand. Each layer of foundation, each stroke of mascara, was a piece of armor. I was calm. I was focused. I was going to a gala, but this was not a party. It was a liquidation. The Field Museum was a spectacle, its grand hall transformed into a glittering cavern of Chicago's elite. The moment we stepped from the car, the camera flashes were blinding, a rapid popping sound like a distant firefight. We moved through it as a unit. Julian's hand was on my back, possessive and proud. My hand was light on his arm, supportive and elegant. We were a well-oiled machine, built for public consumption. Darling, you know the Roths, Julian would murmur, gliding us toward a banking magnate and his skeletal wife. Of course. Sheila, that color is divine on you, I'd say, leaning in for the requisite air kisses, smelling the cloud of Chanel and gin. I smiled. I laughed softly at the appropriate moments. I was the perfect wife, the picture of adoration and quiet confidence. Every smile was a lie. Every touch was a calculation. Julian was in his element. This was his stage, and he was the star performer. He moved through the crowd with an easy, predatory grace, shaking hands, clapping shoulders, his voice a warm, confident baritone that drew people in. I was the beautiful, silent validation of his success. "Marcus," he boomed, spotting his target. We moved toward the main table, where Marcus Thorne, the CEO of Aegis, was holding court. Marcus was an older man, silver-haired, with eyes that saw everything. He was a shark who had long since stopped needing to prove he was a shark. He looked at Julian, then his gaze shifted to me, sharp and assessing. Julian. "You clean up well," Marcus said, his voice a low rumble. "Thank you, sir." Julian glowed, high on the attention. "You know my wife, Ilara." "Of course." Marcus took my hand. His grip was firm, not social. "Ilara, you are the woman who keeps this one on track." He nodded at Julian. "Julian is lucky to have you manage, well, everything, Ilara. We all know who the real brains of the operation is." It was a casual, half-joking compliment, the kind powerful men give to powerful wives. Julian laughed, thinking it was a reflection on him. I smiled, a polite, demure expression. "I just try to keep all the accounts in order." "Marcus," I said, my voice clear and light, "it is important to know where every asset is." Marcus's eyes held mine for a fraction of a second too long. I saw a flicker of genuine respect, and perhaps recognition. He knew I was not just a socialite. He knew exactly what I meant. He was about to respond when a flash of red at a nearby table caught my eye. And then I saw her, Serafina Hayes. She was young, barely 26, and poured into a crimson dress that left nothing to the imagination. She was laughing, her head thrown back, a glass of champagne in her hand, and on her wrist, catching the light from the massive chandeliers, was a spray of diamonds. The bracelet, the $25,000 tennis bracelet from Cartier. She felt my eyes on her. Her laughter died, and she turned. Our gazes locked across the 10 feet of expensive carpet that separated us. She did not look away. She did not look guilty. She looked at me, Ilara Vance, in my bespoke gown and my family jewels, and her expression was one of profound, dismissive pity. It was the look of a victor, so confident in her prize that she felt a sliver of sympathy for the loser. She thought I was the old, oblivious wife. She thought I was too stupid to even know I had been replaced. I held her gaze. I did not glare. I did not flinch. I simply looked at her, my face a mask of perfect serenity, until she, unnerved, was the one to look away. I turned back to my husband. He had seen nothing. He was deep in conversation with a donor, laughing at some vapid joke, completely unaware that his wife and his mistress had just had their first and final conversation. He was oblivious to the fact that his entire world was balanced on the head of a pin. A gavel banged at the front of the room. The auction was beginning. The lights dimmed slightly, focusing our attention on the stage. "And now, ladies and gentlemen," the auctioneer's voice boomed, "our main event." I felt my phone vibrate in my clutch. A notification. Everything was in place. I looked at Julian, his face flushed with champagne and ambition. I knew this was the moment. The auctioneer, a man with a booming voice and the predatory smile of a game show host, took the stage. This was the main event, the part of the evening where status was no longer implied but openly purchased. "We have had a wonderful night. Chicago," he roared. "But now we bid for our centerpiece. We are not just offering a trip, we are offering a legacy." A video screen lit up behind him, showing sweeping vistas of the Okavango Delta. "Our grand prize tonight, a 10-day, fully bespoke luxury safari in Botswana. You will track the kings of the savannah from your private lodge. But more than that." His voice dropped to a conspiratorial hush. "The winner will also be making a $50,000 cornerstone donation in their name to the Aegis Fund. Who wants to be a king?" The room stirred. This was the ultimate prize, a perfect combination of indulgence and tax-deductible altruism. I glanced at our table. Marcus Thorne leaned back, surveying his senior staff. Aegis should have this, he said quietly, not looking at anyone in particular. It is for the fund, after all. Show them what we are made of. It was a command, cloaked as encouragement. It was not about charity. It was about dominance. I looked at Julian. His eyes were bright, his face flushed. He was drunk on the champagne, on the proximity to power, on the sheer, arrogant thrill of the night. He had been charming Marcus for an hour, and now he saw his chance to seal the deal, to prove he was the alpha Marcus was looking for. He caught Seraphina's eye across the room. She was watching him, her gaze a mixture of awe and desire. This was his moment to perform for both his boss and his mistress. "Let us open the bidding at $50,000, the auctioneer shouted. Before the last syllable left his mouth, Julian's paddle was in the air. "50,000, he called out, his voice sharp. A rival at the Goldman Sachs table immediately countered. 60,000, 70, Julian snapped back, not even waiting. 80, 85. Julian shot back, a grin plastered on his face. He was enjoying this, the public fight, the demonstration of his supposed liquidity. He was the star. 90,000 from our friends at Goldman. The auctioneer crowed. Do I hear 95? Julian did not say 95. He let the silence hang for a beat, making sure every eye in the room was on him. He slowly raised his paddle. $100,000. The room went completely silent. The man from Goldman shook his head and lowered his paddle, conceding. The auctioneer's eyes widened. He slammed the gavel down. Sold to the man of the hour, Julian Vance, for $100,000. A wave of applause erupted through the hall. Julian stood up, a king accepting his applause. He turned his beaming face first to Marcus Thorne, who gave him a slow, appreciative nod. The test was passed. Then, Julian allowed himself a quick, subtle glance toward the side table. Seraphina was practically vibrating, her eyes wide, her hand pressed to her chest. He had conquered her, too. Mr. Vance, truly magnificent. The auctioneer boomed, quieting the crowd. A round of applause for Mr. Vance's incredible generosity. Julian remained standing, soaking in the admiration. And now, sir, if we may, the auctioneer continued, we just need to take your card for that $100,000 pledged payment so we can finalize this amazing gift. A staff member with a portable credit card machine began to navigate the tables toward him. This was the climax of Julian's night. With the confidence of a man who believed he owned the world, he reached into the breast pocket of his tuxedo. He did not just pull out his wallet. He produced, with a theatrical flourish, the one card that mattered, the sleek, heavy, anodized titanium of the American Express Centurion card. He held it between two fingers, letting the light catch its black surface, a silent statement of his untouchable status. He handed it to the approaching staff member. Of course. The young staffer, a woman trying to be invisible, took the heavy black card. She held the portable machine up. Julian was still standing, his smile fixed, waiting for the applause to resume. She swiped the card, a small electronic chirp, sharp and weak in the vast hall. A red light blinked on the device. She winced, her professionalism failing for a second. I do apologize, Mr. Vance, she whispered, audible only to our table. It seems to have been declined. The applause had died, leaving a low hum of conversation. That hum now began to falter, like an engine running out of gas. People were noticing the transaction was taking too long. Julian's smile did not disappear, but it froze, becoming a brittle porcelain mask. That is impossible, he said, his voice no longer booming. Run it again. Of course, sir. She ran the card again. The same weak chirp, the same insistent red light. I am sorry, sir. Declined. Try this, Julian said, his voice clipped. He was no longer performing. He snatched the Centurion card from her and shoved his wallet back into his pocket, pulling out the Chase Sapphire Reserve. He thrust it at her. This one. The annoyance was radiating off him. He was being inconvenienced. The staffer, now visibly nervous, took the second card and swiped it. Chirp. Red light. Declined. Sir, she said, her voice trembling, it might just be a fraud alert. The amount is rather large. Perhaps you need to call them. Julian's face was now a dangerous, blotchy red. A single bead of sweat trickled from his hairline, tracing a path down his temple. The entire room was watching. This was no longer a celebration. It was a train wreck. He fumbled in his pocket again and, in his panic, pulled out the third card. The Amex Plum. The secret card. The one he used for Serafina. He did not even seem to realize his error as he shoved it at the terrified woman. This one. Now. He did not know. He could not know. I had been waiting. My phone held discreetly in my lap under my clutch. The moment the auctioneer announced the final bid, I had opened the application. My finger had hovered over the button. The instant he handed over that first card, the instant I knew the transaction was being attempted, I had pressed it. I had not just flagged it for suspicious activity. That was my trap, the one I set for the Centurion. But I had a backup plan. In the end, a simpler, more brutal option was more fitting. I had reported every single card stolen, the Centurion, the Sapphire, and yes, the Plum. In the space of 5 seconds, I had digitally vaporized his entire financial identity. The staffer ran the Plum card. Chirp. Red light. She looked at Julian, her face pale with dread. She was a lowly event staffer, and she was about to humiliate one of the most powerful men in the room. Mr. Vance, she said, her voice now a mortified whisper that carried across the graveyard silence of the hall. I am so sorry. All of your cards are being declined. The silence was absolute. It was no longer a polite pause. It was a vacuum, heavy and crushing. Every eye was fixed on our table. I saw Serafina, her hand still pressed to her chest, her expression of adoration twisting into confusion. I turned my head and looked at Marcus Thorne. His face was a mask of granite. He was not confused. He was not embarrassed. He was annoyed. Julian had taken the spotlight and then failed, publicly and spectacularly. He had made Aegis look weak. He had made Marcus look foolish. Julian's head snapped toward me. The panic was raw, naked in his eyes. The charismatic executive was gone, replaced by a terrified boy. Ilara, he hissed, his voice cracking. Wow, what is happening? Call the bank! I heard his voice, thin and sharp with panic. Call the bank. I took a slow, deliberate breath. I placed my silk napkin carefully on the table, a picture of perfect composure. Then, I stood up. I smoothed the front of my gown, my movements slow, graceful, and utterly calm. I looked like a concerned wife, rising to sort out a minor, embarrassing technicality. Julian's eyes were locked on me, wide with a desperate plea. He still thought I was his partner. He still thought I was there to fix this for him. I began to walk the few steps toward him and the trembling staff member. At the same time, Marcus Thorne, who had been observing this entire collapse with a tightening jaw, pushed his chair back and also moved in. He was not coming to help. He was coming to contain the damage to his brand. He arrived at Julian's side just as I did. I looked at the flustered staffer, my face a mask of polite concern. Is there a problem? I asked, my voice sweet, as if I had just noticed the commotion. The poor woman looked at me, desperate for an ally. Oh, thank you, ma'am. Yes, all of Mr. Vance's cards were declined. The machine. It says the primary cardholder must authorize the charge. Julian let out a choked sound, a mix of a laugh and a sob. Ilara, just tell them authorize it. Marcus Thorne looked past Julian, his eyes settling on me. His gaze was cold and analytical. He was no longer looking at the charming wife of his protégé. He was looking at a variable he had not accounted for. Ilara, he said, his voice a low command. Is there a problem? This was the moment. The entire silent room was the audience. My husband was the panicked performer. His lover was the shocked onlooker, and my husband's boss was the judge. I met Marcus's gaze directly. I did not blink. Yes, Marcus, I said, my voice clear and carrying in the hush. There is. I turned first to the staff member, dismissing her with a simple sentence. You can stop trying. I am the primary card holder. The woman's eyes widened in understanding. She took a half step back, clutching the useless machine. Then, I turned to my husband, to Julian. He was staring at me, his face pale, the sweat cooling on his skin. The panic in his eyes was slowly, horribly being replaced by a dawning, sickening comprehension. I did not whisper. I did not shriek. I spoke at a perfect conversational volume, the kind one uses at a dinner party, knowing full well that Marcus, and the tables nearest to us, would hear every single precise word. I discovered your affair, Julian, I said, my voice as cold and hard as the diamonds at my throat. I saw the $25,000 bracelet you bought for her. I made the smallest, most subtle tilt of my head in the direction of the red dress, just enough for Marcus, who missed nothing, to follow the line of sight. I saw his eyes flicker to Serafina, then back to me. Julian made a noise, a small, strangled gasp, but I continued. You bought it with the account I manage. You booked the hotels with the card I pay. You thought I was an accessory. So, yes, I said, concluding my statement. I canceled the cards, all of them. Julian looked as if I had struck him. He was mute, his mouth opening and closing uselessly. I turned my attention, and my body, away from him, giving him my back. I faced Marcus Thorne directly. I was no longer the wife. I was a professional addressing another professional. I sincerely apologize for the scene. Marcus, I said, my voice crisp and formal. It appears my husband's personal liabilities have become a very public and very expensive embarrassment. The silence I had created lasted only a second. It was immediately filled by a sound far worse, a sudden, explosive rush of whispers. The entire room, hundreds of Chicago's most influential people, erupted in a sibilant wave of shocked, delighted gossip. People were not even trying to be discreet. They were turning in their chairs, pointing, their faces alive with the scandal. I saw Serafina. Her face, once flush with victory, was now a dead, chalky white. Her hand instinctively went to her wrist, to the glittering diamond bracelet, as if it were suddenly burning her skin. She understood. It was not a trophy, it was a brand. She was no longer the alluring victor. She was the home-wrecking associate who had just been publicly identified. Her career, I knew, was over. Julian remained frozen, a statue of his own failure. He was still standing, his hand half outstretched, his face a mask of utter, catastrophic humiliation. He had lost his wife, his dignity, and his financial standing in the space of 30 seconds. But I knew, and he knew. The worst part was that he had done it all in front of the one man he desperately needed to impress. Marcus Thorne looked at Julian. His face was not sad or angry or even disappointed. It was pure, unadulterated disgust. This was not a moral judgment on the affair. Marcus had likely seen and participated in hundreds. This was a professional judgment. Julian was messy. He was chaotic. He had lost control of his assets, and he had brought his sordid personal life into a public forum, embarrassing the firm. He was a liability. Vance, Marcus snapped, his voice like a whip crack. Julian flinched. his eyes wide and terrified, like a dog that had been struck. "My office! 8 in the morning!" Marcus commanded. "Do not be late!" It was not an invitation. It was a summons to an execution. Having delivered the sentence, Marcus dismissed Julian from his line of sight. He turned his full, undivided attention to me. The disgust vanished, replaced by something else, a cold, hard, professional respect. He saw me clearly now, not as a wife, but as a fellow strategist. I had identified a bad asset and I had liquidated it, decisively. He gave me a single, sharp nod. "Alara," I nodded back. "Marcus." With that, our business was concluded. I turned back to the still cowering staff member who was looking at Julian and me as if we were a bomb about to explode. I reached into my clutch, the one that held only my phone, and I pulled out a new, slim card. It was platinum, not black, and it bore only one name, Alara Vance. I handed it to her. "Please put the $100,000 donation on this," I said, my voice projecting just enough to be heard over the dying whispers. "The donation is to be listed under my name, Alara Vance. Only." The staffer, her hands shaking, took the card. She swiped it. There was no pause. There was no red light. A single affirmative green chirp. The transaction was approved instantly. The auctioneer, who had been watching this drama with the fascination of a spectator at a Roman Colosseum, finally found his voice. He recovered, seeing his main donation was secure. "The donation is secured," he boomed into the microphone, his relief palpable. "A tremendous, generous gift. Thank you, Mrs. Alara Vance." The name echoed in the hall. My name. Not Mr. and Mrs. Vance. Not Julian Vance. Mine. I took my receipt from the staffer. I did not look at Julian. I did not look at Serafina. I did not look at Marcus. I turned, gathered my silk wrap from the back of my chair, and began to walk. I moved through the parting sea of whispers, my back straight, my head high. I walked out of the grand hall, out of the museum, and into the cool Chicago night, alone. I did not run, I did not hurry, and I did not once, look back. The doorman at the peninsula greeted me by my maiden name, a name I had not used publicly in a decade. "Welcome back, Ms. Davies. Your suite is ready." The suite was vast and silent, overlooking the avenue. I took off the sapphire gown, letting it fall to the floor in a silk pool. I did not feel triumphant. I did not feel sad. I felt simply efficient. I had closed a bad position. I turned on my phone, which I had powered off in the car. It exploded immediately, a rapid-fire vibration against the marble vanity, a string of texts from Julian. "You ruined me. How could you do this? My life is over, Alara. What did you do? Answer me. My keys won't work. They won't let me in the building." I read them with the same detached interest I would read a frantic, failing stock report. Then I blocked his number. A new email pinged at the top of my inbox. The sender was Marcus Thorne. The timestamp was 10 minutes ago. It was brief and professional. "Ms. Vance," it began. "Not Alara. Please accept my apologies for the unprofessional conduct of my employee this evening. That situation should never have escalated publicly. I have instructed my legal department to contact your counsel regarding the immediate separation of any and all Aegis-related assets, including deferred compensation and partnership buy-in. We value discretion, and I trust we can conclude this matter with professional courtesy. My team will await contact from yours." He had already calculated the fallout. He was not apologizing for Julian's affair. He was apologizing for the mess. He was making a clean break, cutting the liability. He had already demoted me from Alara to Ms. Vance. He was treating me as a counterparty in a negotiation. I respected that. I opened my drafts folder. The 2 emails sat waiting. The first to my lawyer, the one with the audit attached. The second to my accountant. I hit send on both. It was 10:05 p.m. The divorce was now officially in motion. I slept. for the first time in 3 days, soundly and without dreams. I learned of the consequences the next morning. My lawyer called at 8:30 a.m. Julian had been fired at 8:05 a.m., 5 minutes after his meeting with Marcus began. Serafina Hayes had been terminated via an email from Human Resources at 7 a.m., citing a severe ethics violation and a morals clause in her employment contract. The bracelet had cost her everything. I could picture Julian reeling from his termination, returning to the penthouse, our home, only to find his key fob dead. The concierge, acting on my instructions from the previous day, would have politely informed him that he was no longer listed as a resident and that he would need to contact Mrs. Vance to schedule a time to retrieve any personal belongings. I knew what he would discover next. In his panic, he would have tried to access the joint accounts, only to find them hollowed out. I had not just taken my half. I had, in the preceding 48 hours, executed a full liquidity transfer. I took every liquid dollar, every stock, every bond, every redeemable asset that was not legally protected by his name alone. I left him with the illiquid, heavily mortgaged assets, the penthouse itself, the place in Aspen, the modern art I always hated. He was asset-rich and cash-poor, left to pay the mortgages on properties he could no longer afford with a salary that no longer existed. And then, the final, crushing blow he would have called the family lawyer, the man we had used for a decade. And that lawyer would have politely informed him of a conflict of interest, as his primary retainer was with me. He would have called the accountant, only to be told the same. He had spent 10 years believing my infrastructure was his infrastructure. He was discovering, in the space of one morning, that he had no lawyer, no accountant, and no money. He had no representation at all. I thought about this as I sat in the sunlit restaurant of the peninsula. I was not looking at my phone. I was looking at a woman named Diane Morrison, the most senior headhunter in Chicago's financial sector. "So, Alara," she said, stirring her coffee, "you have been out of the game for a while, managing the Vance portfolio. Why the sudden interest in getting back in?" I smiled, picking up my menu. "I have just successfully divested from a very significant, very volatile, and underperforming asset. I believe that makes me uniquely qualified for a role in risk management. Now, tell me what you have for me." 3 months. That is all it took to dismantle a decade. The divorce was in its final stages, a matter of signatures. The noise from that night at the museum had been deafening. Then it had faded, leaving behind the hard reality. I was now a managing director at a rival investment bank. My return to the industry had been swift. It turned out that executing one of the most public, precise financial demolitions in recent Chicago history was a powerful resume. I had proven I was not risk-averse. I was simply ruthless in managing it. Julian, I had heard, was financially paralyzed. The scandal had not just been a social embarrassment, it was a professional blacklisting. No high-level consulting firm would touch him. He was too public, too messy, a known liability. He was living in a rented apartment in River North, his assets frozen or seized to cover the debts I had so carefully left him. We met one last time, not in a home, but in the sterile, neutral territory of a lawyer's conference room. He was to sign the final papers. The man who walked in was not Julian Vance. He was not the charismatic, shining star of Aegis. He was a ghost. He wore a suit, but it hung on him, as if he had lost weight he could not spare. His eyes were dull, the trademark confidence completely extinguished. He was just a man in a cheap suit, carrying the heavy bill for his own failures. He sat down opposite me at the long mahogany table. His lawyer, a public defender type he had clearly been assigned, fussed with papers. Julian did not look at the papers. He looked at me. His voice was quiet, a reedy, hollow sound that barely carried across the table. "Why, Alara?" he asked. "Why like that? So public. You could have just left. You could have filed. Why destroy me?" I looked at him, not with anger, not with hatred. I felt nothing but the cold, clear finality of a closed account. "You spent 10 years, Julian," I said, my voice steady and low, "building your reputation on a foundation I laid. You took all the credit. You charmed the rooms. You networked. You were the star. And you thought my work, the work that paid for your suits, your cars, the penthouse, the investments that funded your ambition, you thought that was just wife's work. You thought managing the money, the portfolios, the social calendar was a hobby." I leaned forward slightly. "You forgot that it was the work. It was the only work that mattered." His eyes flinched, but I continued. "When you betrayed me, you did not just cheat on a wife. You cheated on your business partner. You cheated on your chief investor. And you cheated on your banker. You exposed our entire enterprise to a ridiculous sentimental risk for a 26-year-old and a diamond bracelet." I picked up the pen. "I did not destroy you, Julian. I just balanced the books. You were a bad investment. You were over-leveraged, your returns had diminished, and your personal behavior presented an unacceptable risk." I signed my name on the final page, a crisp, dark signature, Ilara Vance. "And I said, pushing the document across the table toward him, "I simply cut my losses." I stood up. I did not wait for his signature. I did not wait for his lawyer to speak. I left him there, a man I no longer knew, sitting in a borrowed room with a pen and the bill for his own failure. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to connect with all of you, so please, comment below and let me know where you are listening from and share your thoughts. Be sure to subscribe to Lily Revenge Stories and like this video. And if you want to support this channel even more, please hit that hype button so this story can be heard by more people.